Did you have that guy that went for 30, maybe 40 plus points in fantasy last week? If you did, you probably won. That's what it's all about. Getting that huge upside, those boom plays. Here are the players we think could do it in week 4. You should also take a look at your pick'ems, and I'm talking about Underdog. If you haven't tried it yet, right now as a new customer, you can get Dak Prescott higher than 0.5 total yards. It's a free pick for you if you sign up right now on Underdog using code ENDGAME. Plus, you also still get a 50% deposit match up to $1,000 of bonus cash just for signing up. All right, Chris, start off. Who's a player you feel like you've got to have in your lineups everywhere?
Believe it or not, I think you actually have to have a Giants player in your lineup this week. And no, not talking about my league neighbors, although you got to have them as well. I'm actually talking about running back Devin Singletary. This guy's been really good for 2 games in a row. And look, after he was good in week 2 against the Commanders, it's like, okay, it's the Commanders. Let's pump the brakes a little bit. But he was even better last week against the Browns. He's the clear-cut, undisputed workhorse in this running back. I mean, sure, Tyron Tracy gets like a touch or 2, but that's really it. He gets all the touches in this backfield. And now he gets a matchup that, if I would have told you at the beginning of the season is the best matchup in fantasy, you would have laughed at me. But believe it or not, the Dallas Cowboys are currently the worst rushing defense in the NFL by a mile. Derrick Henry just broke out the time machine in week 3, running like he's back in his prime, going wild against this defense. We saw what Alvin Kamara did 2 weeks ago, also broke out the time machine 2 weeks ago. Why can't Devin Singletary do it this week? He's going to get the touches. I'm honestly not even worried about game script going away from him, because even if it does go away from him a little bit, he's also involved in the passing game here. I think Devin Singletary is set up to have another very big game here in week 4. Something I didn't think I would be saying at the beginning of the season, but here we are. And look, even if you don't have Devin Singletary on your fantasy team, or you're scared to put him in your lineup for some reason, you shouldn't be scared to take his pick on Underdog, because right now his line is only 62.5 rushing yards. He's done that each of the last 2 games. He's gone higher than that, and he gets the best matchup of the 3 here. So you want to pair this Devin Singletary pick with that Dak Prescott new customer special. That's an easy way to get a win right out of the gates. And don't forget, if you're joining Underdog for the first time, use promo code ENDGAME, because not only will you get that Dak Prescott new customer special, you'll get that bonus cash up to $1,000 as well.
All right, now let's look at some inferior pass defenses we want to take advantage of. We all know what the worst pass defense is in the league, and we'll get to that in a second. But would you believe me when I told you that the Rams are second? That's right, 31st against the pass, and not looking very good when it comes to stopping opposing receivers. Obviously, Juwan Jennings just broke into the record books because he faced this Rams defense. Nobody saw that coming, but this wasn't the first time that this happened this season. In fact, it's happened every single week, because in week 1, remember Jameson Williams' breakout career game? Yeah, it came against the Rams. Remember Marvin Harrison, his career breakout game? Yeah, it came against the Rams. Now, DJ Moore will not have his first career breakout game because he's done it before, but he's going to do it again and have another great game here against the Rams. It's really shocking. I mean, we knew the loss of Aaron Donald would be felt. We maybe underestimated exactly how much it would be felt. And we thought the secondary would be okay because they got a guy like Tre'Davious White over from Buffalo who had been good with them. He's been one of the worst corners in the league. White is the 6th worst graded cornerback in the entire league out of 95 guys. And his partner on the other side, Quentin Lake, is also at the bottom 3rd. Now, the Bears will be able to do what they want in the passing game because they can't run the ball, right? So the Bears finally said, forget it, we give up, we're not going to run it. We're going to let Caleb Williams sling it 50 plus times. And it almost worked. Well, at least it worked for him. Caleb Williams finally had himself a good game passing. DJ Moore had himself a good game. Rome Odunze had a good game. Look, I like both these guys, but I like Moore a little bit better because he is still the leader on this offense in terms of target share. And honestly, he should have been doing much better. He's one of the leaders in terms of underachieving on expected fantasy points, 15.2 gap. If you look at all wide receivers, he's 9th in targets per game. So DJ Moore is now one of the top 5 target getters in the NFL. Yeah, that's definitely worth something in and of itself. In this matchup, I really think Moore is just going to feast. So I'm going to start Moore everywhere I got him. I'm probably going to start Odunze a lot as well. All right, but there is a defense that is definitely worse, and I think we could take advantage of that too.
Yeah, you talked about Marvin Harrison having his best game against the Rams. I think he's going to top it this week against the Commanders, who are easily the worst secondary in the NFL right now. We just saw what Jamar Chase did to this secondary. Now, I'm not saying Marvin Harrison is Jamar Chase, but he's a good enough talent here. And you look at the numbers on the season, he's got a 34% target share over the last 2 games. He's averaging almost 100 yards per game, and he ranks 9th on the season among all wide receivers in expected fantasy points. The usage is there for Marvin Harrison. I know in week 3 he didn't have a huge game. I mean, he wasn't bad. He certainly got overshadowed by Malik Neighbors, but I think this week he's going to overshadow maybe every wide receiver. This guy is getting the kind of usage that allows those huge boom games. He has 371 air yards on the season, which ranks 3rd, and he has 2 end zone targets, which is a huge number for a wide receiver right now. Everything is there. He could have 100 plus yards, 2 plus touchdowns against his Commanders defense, and he's got Kyler Murray, who's playing great right now. So Marvin Harrison Jr., I know he's probably a guy you're not benching anyways, although we get a lot of questions about him. This week, don't even think about it. Get him in your lineup. I think he's going to have his best game ever, even though he hasn't had many, but even better than the game he had back in week 2 against the Rams.
All right, well, last week, Jackson Smith and Jigma was overshadowed by his fellow receiver, DK Metcalf. Jason's one of those type of players, you know this is going to happen. He's not going to go off every single week. Look, neither is DK Metcalf. But I want to keep that upside in my lineup still, and I definitely want to do that in week 4 because against the Detroit Lions, this matchup actually could favor JSN more than Metcalf or Tyler Lockett. So one thing I will say, not to excuse his poor performance in fantasy-wise in week 3, but this game really could have been different if this was a different Dolphins team, obviously with backup quarterbacks there. You know, the Seahawks just got off to a big lead early. There was no fight from the Dolphins offense. So Seattle kind of took their foot off the gas pedal. They only threw it 34 times, just spread the ball around. And so Jason just wasn't that involved. Well, in this game, Detroit at home should put up points. Seattle will probably have to pass it more. And like I said, Detroit defensively, it's kind of a mixed bag here because, you know, you look, they give up a lot of points in general to both quarterbacks and receivers, but they're much better on the outside than on the inside. So you want to target those slot receivers. We've seen guys, albeit, yes, elite slot receivers, but Cooper Kupp have a monster game against the Detroit defense. Chris Godwin, the same thing. Maybe JSN is this next monster slot receiver to have a big game. Got a 70% slot rate. Tyler Lockett's 29%. They're moving these guys around. JSN is working as that big slot, and this is exactly what gives that Lions defense trouble. So the way this game is going to go and the way this defense operates, I think this is a huge bounce back. So I'm going to be all in on JSN, and I think that he will pay off. All right, now it looks like we're going back to the well with another boom pick.
Yeah, I think for the first time in endgame history, I'm picking the same player to boom 2 weeks in a row, even though he boomed last week. That's right, Amari Cooper. I said, hey, I feel like this is a boom week. I know it's risky, but I feel like it's a boom week, and he boomed. But you know what? I'm picking him again because as good as he was last week, there's still meat on the bone here. Number 1, we talked about those expected fantasy points. This is one of the things I was saying last week. I was like, hey, all the numbers point to the fact that Amari Cooper should have way more fantasy points. It just hasn't happened. It happened last week, but you know what? Even with it happening, he's still 20 points below his expected fantasy points. He still should be doing even more than he's already done. Not to mention this week, he gets the Raiders, bottom 10 against the pass. So this could be another game where it connects for him and he booms again. And again, I talked about with Marvin Harrison, he's got the kind of numbers you look for in a wide receiver who could potentially boom. He ranks 2nd in air yards among all wide receivers. He also has 2 end zone targets. And you look at this Raiders defense and how they've performed against wide receivers so far this year, it's not pretty. Week 1, Ladd McConkey, 5 catches, 39 yards, a touchdown. Week 2, Zay Flowers, 7 catches, 91 yards, a touchdown. Week 3, this last week, Deontay Johnson, 8 catches, 122 yards, a touchdown. His best game ever. Why can't Amari Cooper do it again? So I called him a boom last week. He boomed. You know what? Let's go back to the well. Let's call him a boom again. Just keep Amari Cooper in your lineup. There's still meat on the bone here. He could certainly go back-to-back weeks being a boom.
All right, now I'm going to be really interested to see what gives here in this Jaguars-Texans game. Both teams coming off a beatdown in week 3. someone's going to come back strong, get a win, and be happy. And let's hope that there's actually some points here because neither of these offenses did anything in week 3. Well, they play each other, so someone's got to go off, and I think it's finally time for CJ Stroud to put up a good game because you might not even notice this, but Stroud really hasn't been good for fantasy. Not a single 300-yard game yet. He's just coming off of that week 3 loss to Minnesota. His second multi-interception game of his career. Maybe the offensive line is partly to blame. Maybe it's him, probably both. He's been sacked at least 3 times in all 3 games this season. So who knows what's going on? This better receiving core was supposed to help him, and it really hasn't so far. But this is the chance for him to really come back in a big way because it's the Jaguars. I mean, come on. If there's a team that's bouncing back, I'm pretty sure it's the Texans. This Jaguars team was just humiliated on Monday Night Football, and I really just don't think they're getting better. Now, remember, too, this Jags defense does have some good pass rush up front, but the secondary is hurting. Tyson Campbell, their best corner, on IR. They're going to give up some big plays in the passing game like they've been doing all season long. And so I could say, well, Nico Collins probably going to have a big game. I bet he will. You're starting him anyways. Stephon Diggs, I think he does have a big game, but I'm not completely convinced that it's going to be him or Tank Dell or Nico. Maybe it's all of them, but one thing I do know, CJ Stroud has not put up good numbers yet this year. I think this is a game he just goes off and he'll make up for it. So while we didn't say CJ Stroud is an absolute no doubt must start quarterback anymore because of the way he's performed, I think he's a must start this week. He's going to come back strong. All right, I think you've also got another bounce back candidate in mind who didn't go off last week.
No, Tony Pollard didn't go off last week. Finally was like, hey, look, Tony Pollard, I think we got to buy into Tony Pollard, put him on the buy low. Told a bunch of people to start him, and he was terrible. But there's still some encouraging signs here. He's still, even with Tyjae Spears back, he still out-carried him. Now, granted, it was only 6 carries to 2 because they couldn't really run the ball because they were losing the whole game. And they both had 4 targets. So I still think this is clearly Tony Pollard's backfield. It's just game script got away from them last week. They couldn't run the ball. But I'm not worried about that this week because they get your Dolphins, who I'm not worried about this offense, putting the Tennessee Titans in negative game script. Look, maybe the Titans won't blow them out, but it'll at least be a close competitive game, which means they'll be able to run the ball. They'll be able to give the rock to Tony Pollard. And this Dolphins defense, it's just not good. And it's not even good against the run. One of the worst rushing defenses right now. They're giving up the 2nd most fantasy points to running backs. And they've also allowed the 9th most explosive runs of any defense in the NFL. So Tony Pollard's the type of guy that he's not one of these guys that you say, oh, he's a volume dependent guy. Like he just needs to grind out all that volume. No, he's an explosive runner. He's a big play type of guy. I think against this Dolphins run defense, we're going to see 1 or 2 big plays from Tony Pollard. He's got touchdown upside. He's involved in the passing game. And again, this is not a game where I'm worried about game script getting away from the Titans. So, look, I know Tony Pollard was terrible last week. I know we told a lot of you to start Tony Pollard, and it didn't work out. But I'm telling you, don't give up on Tony Pollard. I think he bounces back this week, and I think he could even boom.
All right, so I'm going to just pick some low-hanging fruit here. I know the Commanders are the worst pass defense, and I completely agree with your pick of Marvin Harrison Jr., so I'm going to double down here. Let's go with another Cardinals receiver, Michael Wilson. Now, this sounds a little riskier, and of course it is because he's not the number 1 receiver there, but he could be the number 2 target because keep in mind, Trey McBride, that nasty hit that led to the concussion protocol, may not be available for week 4. Even if he does play, it's not like he's seeing a ton of targets here. But come on, it's the Commanders, okay? We could see multiple receivers go off in this game. And so Wilson, I think, is a very interesting upside play here because he actually finally had a big target share in this past week. 9 targets, caught 8 of them for 64 yards. Like he's averaging 7.7 yards per target, which is pretty good. So again, if you get that target share up a little bit, which we finally saw, and again, potential for even more if McBride sits, we could finally see a huge game from this guy. He's got blazing speed. He's a downfield threat, just hasn't quite been used that way yet. But again, this could be the week. And so I won't go so far as to say Wilson is a must start because he's not there yet, right? But you're looking for a flex with upside. This is what we're talking about. The guy that could put up a big game seemingly out of nowhere. Like, where was this guy? Well, I'm telling you, he's right here. He's available in a lot of leagues. You might even be able to pick him up. If he's sitting on your bench, you need some upside, you're hurting, go with a guy like Wilson against this Commanders defense. This is a team that heading into week 3 gave up the second most fantasy points per drop back in zone, and Michael Wilson has one of the best separation scores against zone defenses. This is like a match made in fantasy heaven. I'm going to take a shot on that upside. All right, now you know who we love as those big upside plays, but if you still need help at every position, we got start sit for running back, receiver, quarterback, tight end, trade advice, waiver wire. Everything you need is right here in the week 4 playlist.